I think that we must do everything that we possibly can in order to bring our hostages home. They have been languishing there for far too long, 171 days already, since being abducted during the most brutal and murderous rampage against the Jewish people since the Holocaust. And I think that bringing them home is vital to our war goals, but also destroying Hamas's military capabilities is vital to our war goals. And so I think if we need to have a temporary pause, not a ceasefire, and certainly not a long-term ceasefire, but a temporary pause in order to bring our hostages back to their loved ones and to their countries, we would do well to avail ourselves of that possibility. But then we must also ratchet up the war machine and move forward to crush, destroy, and eliminate Hamas's military capabilities. It's vital that we do that.
A ceasefire can begin immediately with the release of the first hostage. And so we must put pressure on Hamas to do just that.
I am not surprised by the uptick in anti-Semitism for two reasons. The first is a personal reason. I lived through this. As I mentioned earlier, I was born and raised in Leeds in the United Kingdom. I went to university at the University of Manchester during the events of the Second Intifada. Now, the Second Intifada, for people who aren't aware of it, was a wave of Palestinian homicide bombings against innocent Israelis, Jewish and non-Jewish alike, incidentally. And it became very clear to me as I was in my capacity of a student campaigner at that time, that regardless the number of buses that were blown apart, regardless the number of Israelis who were murdered in the course of undertaking the perfectly ordinary and mundane, from the professor to the student, from the elected official to the voter, from the professional to the layman, there was near total unanimity lined up, at least in public, behind the idea that the state of Israel had no right to defend itself, and that it was responsible for the horrors that were wrought against it. Seeing that multifaceted anti-Semitism, I resolved that I would move to the state of Israel, and I promptly did so after graduating from my studies there. There is nothing new under the sun. The fact that the international community will condemn Jewish people for defending themselves and will attack Jews wherever they may be for the policies, including the righteous, virtuous, and justified policy of making war against a terror organization that has committed an atrocity against our people. The fact that we're seeing that is not new, but it's also unique. For example, were China to have a horrific policy inside its country, to draw a distinction, as I said, I believe that our policy against Hamas is wholly just, but were China to have a particularly appalling policy or an unpopular policy inside China, you would not have Brits attacking anybody who appeared to be Chinese inside Britain. Were Pakistan to have an appalling policy inside Pakistan, you would not have Brits attacking those of Pakistani descent inside the borders of Britain, because of the policies of the Pakistani government. And the list goes on and on and on and on. There is an exception to that rule, and that is the attitudes of people towards Jewish citizens of the diaspora countries. Only in that case do you see a situation wherein the people of Britain, the people of America, the people of Denmark, the people of France say the Jewish state is enacting a policy of which we do not approve. We will therefore vilify, torment, traumatize, and pursue you Jews here in Britain, you Jews here in America, you Jews here in France. It's an appalling double standard, but it's not new. And I also want to talk about something on a macro scale. The reason that people have become absolutely unmasked and even proud of their hatred towards Jewish people inside Western democracies, the most troubling area in which this is happening, is quite simple. The Jewish diaspora can never be stronger than is the Jewish state. The strength of the American Jewish community can never supersede the strength of the Israeli Jewish community. The strength of the Anglo-Jewish community can never supersede the strength of the Israeli Jewish community. And on October 7th, what these anti-Semites in Western democracies thought mistakenly was that finally the Jewish state was on the ropes. They thought that they might be seeing the dismantling, the beginning stages of the dismantling of the one and only Jewish state. That emboldened them to attack the members of the Jewish community in their countries, because they believed that given that the Jewish state of Israel is vulnerable, the Jewish people in other countries are also vulnerable and are there for the taking. I also want people to be aware of something when it comes to who we're fighting against. There's much talk about the disproportionality of Israel's response inside the Gaza Strip. You know, on October 7th, as I mentioned earlier, 1,200 Israelis were murdered in the space of one day by way of an invasion by Hamas into the state of Israel. Now, the war has endured for 171 days. By that notion, if you take the 1,200 Israelis who were murdered in one day, that shows you that across the 171 days, if Hamas was given its will, 205,200 Israelis would have been murdered by now. But the international community, who seems so ready to defend Hamas, should be very, very aware of the standards of that terror organization. Were they to be given free rein and the ability to kill and murder in an uninhibited fashion, they would have by now, according to their own standards, have murdered 205,000 Israelis. That's something that everybody should be very concerned about.
So the very idea of UNRWA is completely the opposite of a two-state solution. That is why children in Gaza are taught, your home is not here in Gaza, your home is over there in Israel. And so when they get cement, what do you think they do with the cement? They don't build like in Dubai up high and build towards the future. They build down below terror tunnels, hundreds and hundreds of miles of terror tunnels, tunneling into Israel, which they used on October 7th to invade and kill and massacre, to exercise what UNRWA tells them is the right of return. So that's the whole essence of UNRWA, is subversive. We discovered in the past few months, more than a dozen UNRWA employees took part in the massacre of October 7th, including one UNRWA worker who kidnapped the lifeless body of Yonatan Samarano and dragged him into Gaza. We know that 450 UNRWA employees in Gaza belong to Hamas and Islamic Jihad. We exposed that 3,000 UNRWA teachers belong to a Telegram chat group that celebrated the atrocities of October 7th. And we know that, when a UNRWA official is suspended for being part of Hamas, the entire UNRWA staff union in Gaza, 8,000 teachers and school principals, went into the streets to protest that a UNRWA staff union leader should be allowed to be a Hamas terrorist leader. So when UNRWA's defenders like Philippe Lazzarini, the Commissioner General, and there are apologists in the West, people like Owen Jones, AOC, Ken Roth, Amnesty International, Senator Chris Van Hollen in America, when they say, it's just a few bad apples. A few bad apples? 450 UNRWA employees are terrorists. 3,000 belong to a chat group that embraced the atrocities. 8,000 UNRWA teachers and school principals in Gaza protested on the streets, rallying for Su'ail al-Hindi, a member of the Hamas Politburo. It's not a few bad apples. The entire UNRWA agency is subverted. It's rotten to the core.